The stars burned cold and distant in the Andorian sector, where 7 massive bioships drifted through space like living mountains. Each ship pulsed with organic light, their hulls breathing as if they were alive. Inside the largest vessel, Kai-Seth the Eternal stood before a viewing port that showed the carnage below. The planet Zephyros was dying. Black tendrils crawled across its surface like veins of poison, spreading faster than wildfire. The void swarm had arrived 3 days ago, and already half the world was consumed. Millions of the bat-like Zephyrians had fled to the poles, huddling in their crystal cities while their world died around them. Kai-Seth was tall, even by the standards of his people. His skin was like clear crystal, showing the glowing blue networks that ran through his body like liquid starlight. His eyes held the weight of 3,000 years, and in those years he had saved more worlds than most species had ever seen. The Zephyrians below knew his name. They prayed to him in their crystal temples. They carved his likeness into their monuments. He was their god, and gods did not fail. Eternal One, came a voice behind him. Valandra, his second in command, approached with the fluid grace of their kind. Her crystal skin showed worry patterns, dark lines that flickered through her neural networks. The swarm is adapting faster than before. Our psychic attacks are having less effect. Kai-Seth nodded slowly. The void swarm was old, perhaps older than even the Eternal Guard. It had consumed galaxies before this one, leaving nothing but empty space in its wake. The swarm was not truly alive, not in any way that mattered. It was hunger given form, intelligence focused on one terrible purpose: to devour everything that lived and thought and dreamed. For 2,000 years, the Eternal Guard had held it back. 7 warriors, the last of their kind from the dead world of Vexthara. They had powers that seemed like magic to younger races. They could bend space with their minds, turn energy into matter, and live for thousands of years without aging. When they arrived at a threatened world, entire civilizations knelt in worship. But lately the battles had been harder. The swarm learned from each encounter, adapted to their tactics. What had once been easy victories now required real effort. And effort meant risk. "Prepare the reality anchors," Kai-Seth commanded. "We go down to the surface." Valandra's worry patterns grew darker. "Eternal One, perhaps we should try orbital bombardment first. The swarm concentration is very dense. The Zephyrians have built their cities too close to the infection sites. Orbital bombardment would kill millions of them." Kai-Seth turned from the viewing port, his crystal face set with determination. "We are the Eternal Guard. We do not sacrifice those we have sworn to protect." The bioship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Around them, the other 6 ships followed in perfect formation. Each carried one member of the Eternal Guard, beings whose names were spoken with reverence across 100 worlds. Morgoth the Destroyer, who had shattered the Crimson Fleet with his bare hands. Thylara the Weaver, who could reshape matter itself. Zorketh the Mind Render, whose psychic powers could break armies. They were legends. They were gods. They did not lose. The surface of Zephyros was a nightmare of black corruption. The void swarm had turned forests into writhing masses of dark flesh, cities into pulsing hives. The very air seemed thick with malevolence, and the sky had turned the color of old blood. In the distance, the crystal spires of New Zephyros still gleamed, but the corruption was spreading toward them like a slow tsunami. The Eternal Guard descended from their ships like falling stars. Kai-Seth hit the ground first, his feet creating a crater in the infected soil. Around him, his brothers and sisters landed with similar force. Immediately, the swarm responded. The ground erupted with tentacles thick as tree trunks, each one tipped with gnashing mouths. The air filled with shrieking sounds that hurt to hear. But the Eternal Guard was ready. Morgoth raised his hands and pure energy poured from his palms, burning away hundreds of tentacles in seconds. Thylara gestured, and the infected ground turned to glass beneath the swarm's feet. Zorketh's mind reached out and crushed dozens of swarm nodes before they could react. For a moment it seemed like the old days. The swarm retreated, its advance halted by powers it could not match. The Eternal Guard pressed forward, their combined might carving a path through the corruption toward the central hive. But then something changed. The swarm's retreat stopped. New forms erupted from the infected ground, things that looked almost like twisted copies of the Guard themselves. They moved with unnatural speed and struck with calculated precision. "It's learning our patterns," Valandra called out as she dodged a spike that would have pierced her heart. "These forms are designed to counter our abilities." Kai-Seth felt something he had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. The swarm had always been dangerous, but it had never been this adaptive. It was studying them, copying them, turning their own strengths against them. The battle raged for hours. Slowly, inevitably, the Eternal Guard was pushed back. For the first time in living memory, they were not winning easily. Thylara took a wound that sent crystal shards flying from her arm. Morgoth was forced to retreat when a swarm mimic nearly overwhelmed his defenses, and then the unthinkable happened. Jorseth the Swift, youngest of the guard, was caught off guard by a new swarm form that moved faster than thought. The creature's claws pierced his crystal skin, finding the neural networks beneath. Jorseth's scream echoed across the battlefield as his life force was drained away. The first member of the Eternal Guard to die in 800 years fell to the infected ground and did not rise again. The other guard members stared in shock. They had seen death before, of course. They had watched billions of other beings die over the millennia. But they themselves were eternal. They were beyond such mortal concerns. Or so they had believed. "Fall back," Kaiseth commanded, his voice heavy with something that might have been grief. "Return to the ships." As they retreated, the swarm pressed its advantage. The corruption spread faster now, feeding on the psychic energy released by Jorseth's death. By the time the guard reached their bioships, another quarter of the planet was lost. In the command chamber of his vessel, Kaiseth stood once again before the viewing port. Below, New Zephyros burned as the corruption finally reached its crystal spires. Millions of Zephyrians died in minutes, their prayers to the Eternal Guard going unanswered. "Send word to the Galactic Council," Kaiseth said quietly. "Tell them that Zephyros has fallen." Velandra hesitated. "What of our reputation? Our legend?" Kaiseth watched the last lights die on the world below. For 2,000 years, the Eternal Guard had been the galaxy's protectors, its gods made manifest. Species across the stars built temples in their honor, named their children after them, lived and died believing that the Guard would always be there to save them. But gods, it seemed, could bleed. And if they could bleed, then perhaps they could die. The legend, Kaiseth said slowly, may need to change. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance, staring at the sensor readings with disbelief. The human exploration ship was small by galactic standards, barely 300 meters long and carrying a crew of only 200. Most alien species considered human vessels to be little more than primitive metal boxes, held together by stubbornness and hope. But right now, those primitive sensors were showing her something that should have been impossible. "Confirm those readings, Martinez," she ordered her sensor officer. Lieutenant Carlos Martinez double-checked his instruments, his face pale. "Confirmed, Captain. We've got 7 massive biosignatures ahead, engaged in combat with something that's reading as, I don't know how to describe it. It's like empty space that thinks." Chen felt her heart rate increase. Biosignatures that large could only mean one thing: the Eternal Guard. Humanity had heard stories about them from the few alien traders willing to deal with such a young species. Gods of crystal and light who protected the galaxy from ancient evils. Beings so powerful that entire civilizations worshipped them. And if they were fighting something, that something had to be incredibly dangerous. "Sir," called out Communications Officer Lisa Park, "I'm picking up distress signals. Multiple languages, but they're all saying the same thing. The Void Swarm is here." The Void Swarm. Even humans had heard whispers of that name in the darkest corners of space stations. A plague that consumed worlds. An intelligence that turned everything it touched into extensions of itself. The one threat that even the mighty Eternal Guard sometimes struggled to contain. Chen made a decision that would change galactic history. "All stop!" Battle stations. Her crew stared at her in shock. The Defiance was an exploration vessel, not a warship. Its weapons were designed to clear asteroid fields, not fight cosmic horrors. And they were about to interfere in a battle between gods and demons. "Captain," said her first officer, Commander David Kim. "With respect, what can we possibly do against something that's giving the Eternal Guard trouble?" Chen looked at the tactical display. The 7 bioships of the Guard were arranged in a complex formation around what appeared to be a massive spaceborne hive. Energy discharges lit up the darkness as beings of legend fought for the fate of yet another world. But even as she watched, one of the bioships was taking heavy damage. "Maybe nothing," she admitted. "But we're human. We don't walk away when people need help." The bridge crew exchanged glances. They were all volunteers. People who had signed up to explore the galaxy and find humanity's place among the stars. None of them had expected that place to be on a battlefield alongside gods. But Chen was right about one thing. They were human, and humans had a reputation, even among species that looked down on them. When cornered, when facing impossible odds, when any reasonable being would surrender or flee, humans did something else entirely. They attacked. Martinez, give me everything you can on the enemy formation. Park, try to establish communication with the Eternal Guard. Kim, I want every weapon we have armed and ready. Captain, Kim said carefully, our weapons won't even scratch those bioships, let alone whatever they're fighting. Maybe not, Chen replied, but I've got an idea. Martinez, can you identify weak points in that swarm formation? The young officer bent over his instruments. I think so. The swarm seems to be protecting several key nodes. If those are destroyed, the entire structure might collapse. Chen nodded. But the guard can't get to them because the swarm is too heavily defended. Right, any direct assault would be suicide. Good thing we specialize in suicide missions, Chen turned to her communications officer. Park, patch me through to the lead bioship. It took several minutes to establish contact. When the channel opened, the voice that came through was like music made of crystal and starlight. Even through the universal translator, it carried impossible authority. Unknown vessel, you are in extreme danger. Retreat immediately. Chen took a deep breath. She was about to address a being that billions worshipped as a god. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the human vessel UES Defiance. We're here to help. Silence stretched across the channel. When the voice came back, it carried something that might have been confusion. Human, your species is not known for military capability. You lack the power to affect this battle. Maybe, Chen said, but we've got something you don't. And what is that? We're too stupid to know when something's impossible. On the tactical display, the swarm was pressing its attack. 2 of the bioships were now showing serious damage. Whatever the Eternal Guard was fighting, it was winning. Chen opened a channel to her entire crew. Attention all hands. We're about to do something incredibly stupid. We're going to ram a void swarm node. The bridge fell silent. Ramming attacks were considered primitive even by human standards. They were the last resort of desperate captains with nothing left to lose. Sir, Kim said quietly, that will destroy the ship. And us. I know, Chen's voice was steady, but it might give the guard the opening they need. And sometimes that's enough. She opened the channel to the Eternal Guard again. Kaiseth, this is Chen. In 30 seconds, we're going to punch a hole in their formation. When we do, hit the central node with everything you've got. Captain Chen, your vessel will not survive such an action. Probably not. But that's our choice to make. Another silence. When Kaiseth spoke again, his voice carried something the galaxy had not heard from the Eternal Guard in millennia. Amazement. I do not understand your species. Join the club, Chen said with a grin that no one could see. All hands brace for impact. The Defiance turned toward the swarm formation and accelerated. The ship was small and fast. Too small for the swarm to consider a real threat until it was too late. By the time the alien intelligence realized what was happening, the human ship was already committed to its course. Chen watched the distance close on her display. 5 kilometers, 4, 3. The swarm finally reacted, turning its weapons toward the tiny human ship. Energy beams that could have destroyed mountains reached out for the Defiance. But humans had one advantage in this moment. They were unpredictable. Instead of trying to dodge the incoming fire, Chen ordered full power to the forward shields and drove straight through the barrage. The ship bucked and shuddered as its shields failed, but momentum carried it forward. At the last second, Chen activated the ship's emergency beacon. If any humans survived this war, they would know what happened here. They would know that when the galaxy's gods needed help, humans had answered the call. The Defiance struck the swarm node at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a newborn star, and for a moment the swarm's formation wavered. That moment was all Kaiseth needed. The lead bioship surged forward, its crystalline weapons carving through the gap the humans had created. Behind it, the other ships of the Eternal Guard followed, their combined might focused on the central node. The swarm fought back desperately, but the surprise attack had broken its coordination. One by one, its nodes fell to the guard's assault until finally, the entire formation collapsed into drifting debris. In the silence that followed, Kaiseth's bioship approached the wreckage of the Defiance. Incredibly, the human ship's emergency pods had survived the explosion. 200 humans, led by a captain who had been willing to die to save people she had never met. As Chen floated in her escape pod, watching the Eternal Guard's rescue ships approach, she received a communication from Kaiseth himself. "Captain Chen," the crystal voice said, and now it carried something that definitely was amazement. "In 3,000 years, no species has ever sacrificed themselves to aid the Eternal Guard. Why did you do this?" Chen thought about the question as rescue workers pulled her from the pod. Around her, the aftermath of the battle drifted in space. The swarm was defeated. The threatened world was safe. And for the first time in galactic history, humans had fought alongside gods. "Because it was the right thing to do," she said simply. And in that moment, something changed in the galaxy. The Eternal Guard had always been legends, beings of power beyond understanding. But they had fought alone for so long that they had forgotten something important. Sometimes the greatest power was not in crystal skin or psychic abilities. Sometimes it was in the simple decision to help, no matter the cost. News traveled fast in the galactic network. Within days, every civilized world had heard the impossible story. Humans had fought alongside the Eternal Guard. The reactions varied from species to species, but most fell somewhere between disbelief and outright laughter. The Altarian High Council dismissed it as propaganda. The Crystalline Confederacy called it a translation error. Even the normally open-minded Verdani Republic suggested that perhaps the humans had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. But Kaiseth knew the truth. He had seen Captain Chen's ship drive itself into certain death to create an opening for the Guard. He had felt the shockwave of the explosion, had watched human escape pods drift through space after their vessel was destroyed. Most importantly, he had heard the certainty in Chen's voice when she said it was simply the right thing to do. The Eternal Guard had returned to their sanctuary, a hidden station in the void between galaxies where they planned their campaigns and healed their wounds. For the first time in centuries, they were having an argument. "It changes nothing," Morgeth insisted, his crystal form pulsing with agitation. "They are still primitives, short-lived, physically weak with no psychic abilities worth mentioning. One act of bravery does not make them useful allies." Thylara disagreed. "You did not see their tactics, brother. They attacked in a way that none of us would have considered. Direct sacrifice for strategic advantage. There is wisdom in that approach." "There is madness in that approach," Morgeth countered. "No rational being throws away their life so casually." Kaiseth listened to the debate while studying reports from across the galaxy. The Void Swarm was mobilizing again, larger than it had been in 1,000 years. Intelligence suggested that this was not just another feeding cycle. This was something bigger, something final. "Perhaps," Kaiseth said quietly, interrupting the argument, "rationality is not what we need right now." The other Guard members turned to look at him. Melandra spoke first. "Eternal One, surely you do not suggest that we adopt human tactics?" "I suggest," Kaiseth replied, "that we consider all options. The swarm is growing stronger. We lost Jorseth in our last major engagement. How many more of us will fall before this is over?" The chamber fell silent. The death of Jorseth had shaken them all. For millennia, they had believed themselves to be truly eternal. The loss of one of their number had revealed the uncomfortable truth that even gods could die. "The humans have something we lack," Kaiseth continued. "They understand that some things are worth dying for. We have spent so long protecting our immortality that we have forgotten how to truly sacrifice." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Sorketh, who had been monitoring the long-range sensors, looked up with alarm. Multiple swarm signatures incoming. Massive concentration, heading for the Kepler Nexus. The Kepler Nexus was one of the most important systems in the galaxy. Its 5 worlds housed the capital of the Celestial Dominion, the closest thing to a galactic government that existed. Billions of beings from dozens of species called the Nexus home. If it fell, the psychological impact alone would cripple resistance efforts across known space. "How long until they arrive?" Kaiseth asked. 6 days, maybe 7. "But Eternal One, the force they are bringing..." Zorketh's mental voice carried fear. "It is larger than anything we have faced. Even if all 7 of us were at full strength, I do not believe we could stop them." Kaiseth stared at the tactical display. The swarm formation was enormous, a writhing mass of corruption that stretched across several light years. At its heart was something new, a structure so massive it defied comprehension. The swarm had been building toward this moment for centuries, gathering its strength for one final push. "Send a message to Earth," Kaiseth commanded. His fellow guard members stared at him in shock. "Eternal One," Velandra said carefully, "surely you do not mean to ask the humans for military assistance?" "That is exactly what I mean." Kaiseth turned from the display to face his companions. "The galaxy is about to face its greatest threat. We need every advantage we can find." "But the other species will never accept it," Tylara protested. "Humans are considered barely above animals by most galactic civilizations. If the Eternal Guard asks for their help, it will be seen as a sign of weakness." "Then let it be seen as such," Kaiseth replied. "Pride is a luxury we can no longer afford." 3 days later, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Yorktown, flagship of humanity's hastily assembled response fleet. The promotion had come with her new mission: coordinate human forces with the legendary Eternal Guard in defense of the Kepler Nexus. It was still hard to believe. 6 months ago, she had been an exploration captain on the edge of known space. Now she was meeting with beings that half the galaxy worshipped as gods. "Admiral," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Guard bioship." "Put it through." Kaiseth's crystalline voice filled the bridge. "Admiral Chen, thank you for responding to our request." "Thank you for asking," Chen replied. "I'll be honest, we're not sure what we can do against something this big, but we're willing to try. Your willingness is precisely why we asked." "The human fleet, how many ships?" Chen looked at her tactical display. Humanity had scraped together everything they could. Exploration vessels hastily converted to warships, cargo haulers fitted with weapons, even a few actual military vessels from Earth's small defense fleet. In total, they had managed to assemble nearly 200 ships. 197 vessels, various classes, she reported. Not much compared to what's coming. "Numbers are not everything," Kaiseth replied. "Your species has already proven that." Over the next 2 days, something unprecedented happened. Human ships took position alongside the bio-vessels of the Eternal Guard. Engineers from both sides worked together to coordinate their systems. Human tactical officers studied guard fighting methods, while the Crystal Warriors observed human approaches to warfare. The differences were startling. The Guard fought like artists, their battles carefully choreographed displays of power and precision. They sought elegant solutions, minimal casualties, and victory through superior ability. Humans fought like cornered animals. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely ruthless when protecting something they cared about. They planned for acceptable losses, prepared contingencies for their contingencies, and considered sacrifice to be just another tactical option. "Your species is difficult to understand," Velandra admitted to Chen during one of their planning sessions. "You speak of death so casually." "Not casually," Chen corrected. "But we accept it. We know our lives are short, so we try to make them count." "And you believe this philosophy will help us defeat the swarm?" Chen looked at the tactical projections. The Void Swarm was only hours away now, a wall of corruption that stretched across the star system. At its heart, the massive central structure pulsed with malevolent intelligence. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know that running away won't help anyone. And I know that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to lose everything." When the swarm arrived, it came like a plague made manifest. The very space around it seemed to writhe and twist, reality bending under the weight of its presence. Ships that got too close simply ceased to exist, not destroyed but consumed, added to the swarm's ever-growing mass. The first wave of the battle went exactly as expected. The Eternal Guard engaged the swarm's vanguard with their usual precision, their bioships dancing through space while unleashing devastating attacks. But this time was different. The swarm had learned from every previous encounter. It adapted to their tactics in real time, countering their moves almost before they made them. "The swarm is too adaptive," Kaiseth reported over the communications channel. "It knows our methods too well." "Then let's show it something new," Chen replied. "All human vessels implement Pattern Delta." What happened next defied everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare. Instead of the careful formations and strategic positioning that characterized normal space combat, the human fleet simply charged. 200 ships, many of them barely armed, dove straight into the swarm's formation. They didn't try to engage the enemy ships in honorable combat. Instead, they targeted weak points, rammed damaged vessels, and used their own destruction as weapons. The swarm's intelligence reeled under the assault. It had been designed to counter rational tactics, to predict and neutralize strategic thinking. But humans weren't fighting strategically, they were fighting emotionally, driven by a fierce protective instinct that cared nothing for odds or rational behavior. "By the stars," Morgeth whispered over the comm channel. "They are actually pushing it back." And they were. The human assault had torn a gap in the swarm's formation, creating an opening that the Eternal Guard could exploit. For the first time in the battle, the forces of order were advancing instead of just holding the line. But the cost was enormous. Human ships were dying by the dozens, their crews sacrificing themselves to keep the attack moving forward. Chen watched her fleet dissolve around her, knowing that every death was necessary, hating herself for the knowledge. "This is unsustainable," Valandra observed. "At this rate, the human fleet will be completely destroyed within the hour." "I know," Chen replied grimly. But the battle for Kepler Nexus had been raging for 18 hours when the impossible happened. Ships from across the galaxy began arriving to join the fight. Not just military vessels, but civilian craft hastily converted to warships, merchant vessels, exploration ships, even passenger liners fitted with whatever weapons their crews could find. Admiral Chen stared at her tactical display in amazement. "How many ships are we looking at now?" "Over 3,000, Admiral," her tactical officer reported. "And more arriving every hour." The Altarian High Fleet just jumped in, followed by the Verdani Defense Corps. Even the isolationist Crystalline Confederacy has sent ships. But the most surprising arrivals were not the military fleets. They were the irregulars, ships crewed by beings who had watched the human fleet's suicidal charge and decided they wanted to be part of something larger than themselves. "This is Captain Veltar of the freighter Stardust," came a transmission from an aging Altarian cargo vessel, requesting permission to join the battle line. "Captain, you're a civilian ship," Chen replied. "You're not equipped for this kind of fight." "Neither were you 6 months ago," Veltar responded. "But you taught us something about what it means to fight for others. We would like to learn more." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. Across the galaxy, the human approach to warfare was spreading. Species that had fought carefully and conservatively for millennia were suddenly willing to consider sacrifice as a valid tactical option. "All vessels, this is Admiral Chen," she broadcast on an open channel. "Welcome to the fight. Fair warning, we do things differently here. We don't promise you'll survive, but we promise your sacrifice will matter." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Thousands of voices from dozens of species acknowledged the transmission. Some were scared, some were determined, but all of them were ready to fight. At the heart of the swarm formation, the massive central structure pulsed with growing alarm. For millennia, it had fed on civilizations by exploiting their rational self-interest. Species fought to protect themselves, to minimize their losses, to survive. But this new approach was something outside its experience. These beings were fighting to protect others, even at the cost of their own destruction. The swarm's analytical intelligence struggled to process such behavior. How could a rational being choose certain death over possible survival? "The enemy is adapting again," Kai Seth reported from his bioship, "but its adaptations are becoming more erratic. I believe the human tactical approach is causing system-wide confusion in its intelligence matrix." "Good," Chen replied. "Let's confuse it some more. All ships prepare for Operation Last Stand." Operation Last Stand was exactly what it sounded like. The combined fleet would form a defensive sphere around the Nexus worlds and fight to the last ship. No retreat, no surrender, no quarter asked or given. It was the kind of plan that any reasonable military commander would have rejected as pure madness. The gathered fleet loved it. As the massive formation took shape, something unprecedented happened. The various species began sharing tactics, combining their technologies in ways that had never been attempted before. Altarian shields were linked to human weapon systems. Verdani ships used crystalline navigation arrays to coordinate attacks. Even the proud warriors of the Eternal Guard found themselves learning from the chaotic, emotional approach of their new allies. "This is not how we have fought for 3,000 years, Valandra observed to Kai Seth as they watched human engineers install new weapon systems on her bioship. "Perhaps," Kai Seth replied, "that is why we needed to change." The second phase of the battle began when the swarm's main force reached the defensive sphere. What followed was beyond anything in galactic military history. Ships from a dozen species fought and died together, their crews calling out battle cries in languages most of them didn't understand, but somehow felt in their hearts. The human influence was everywhere. Altarian captains ordered ramming attacks on swarm nodes. Verdani crews sang human war songs as they drove their ships into enemy formations. Even the ancient and dignified crystalline vessels abandoned their traditional hit-and-run tactics in favor of desperate close-quarters combat. But the cost was terrible. Ships died by the hundreds, their crews making the ultimate sacrifice to hold the line. The defensive sphere contracted slowly but steadily as the swarm pressed its attack. At the current rate of loss, the fleet would be completely destroyed within hours. It was then that Sergeant Marcus Torres made his decision. Torres was a human marine, assigned to a boarding action against a damaged swarm node. His squad had been pinned down for hours, unable to reach their target as the alien ship regenerated its defenses. Around them, the battle raged in the vacuum of space, ships dying like falling stars. "Sarge," called out Corporal Lisa Park, his communications specialist, "the Eternal Guard bioship is taking heavy damage. They're requesting immediate assistance." Torres looked through his helmet's visor at the massive crystalline vessel in the distance. Its bioluminescent hull was flickering, signs of serious internal damage. But between his position and the bioship was a wall of swarm defenders that would cut down any rescue attempt. "Sir," said Private Johnson, "we'd never make it across that gap. It's suicide." Torres thought about the past 6 months, about everything that had led to this moment. He thought about Captain Chen ramming her ship into a swarm node, about the thousands of beings now fighting and dying together, about what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of gods and monsters. "Maybe," he said, checking his weapon one last time, "but that's never stopped us before." The assault across open space should have failed. Torres and his squad were outnumbered 50-1, charging across a battlefield where any cover would last only seconds. But they had something the swarm didn't expect: absolute commitment. They didn't try to survive the crossing. They tried to inflict maximum damage while dying as slowly as possible. Each Marine became a weapon, using their bodies and equipment to create openings for the others. One by one they fell, but each death brought the survivors closer to their target. Torres was the last one alive when he reached the bioship's hull. His armor was breached, his oxygen running out, but he had made it. The crystalline surface opened to admit him, and he stumbled into a corridor filled with wounded guard members. At the center of the chamber lay Kaiseth himself, his crystal form cracked and bleeding light. The ancient warrior looked up as Torres approached, his eyes wide with something that might have been wonder. "Human," Kaiseth whispered, "why did you come? Your mission was to assault the swarm node, not rescue us." Torres knelt beside the fallen god, his breathing harsh in the damaged armor. "Because you needed help, sir. That's what we do." "Your squad, they are all dead?" "Yes, sir. But we got you the opening you needed. The node's defenses are down. Your people can finish the job." Kaiseth stared at the young human for a long moment. In 3,000 years of existence, he had seen countless acts of courage. But this was different. Torres had not charged across that battlefield for glory or strategy or even survival. He had done it simply because it was right. "I do not understand your species," Kaiseth said finally. Torres smiled, his young face peaceful despite the pain. "That's okay, sir. Sometimes we don't understand ourselves. We just do what needs doing." Around them, the bioship shuddered as the swarm pressed its attack. Torres's breathing was becoming more labored, his damaged armor unable to keep him alive much longer. But he had done what he came to do. The Eternal Guard would survive to fight another day. "Sergeant Torres," Kaiseth said urgently, "you are dying. Let us save you." Torres shook his head weakly. "Don't worry about me, sir. Just make it count. Make all of this count." As the young Marine died in the crystal corridors of a god's ship, something fundamental changed in the galaxy. The Eternal Guard had always fought to preserve life, to protect the innocent, to maintain order. But they had fought as individuals, relying on their superior power to carry the day. Now they understood something new. Sometimes the greatest power came not from crystal skin or psychic abilities, but from the simple willingness to stand up and say, "Not today," to the darkness, no matter the cost. The lesson would reshape everything that followed. But first they had a war to win. The death of Sergeant Marcus Torres changed everything. As news of his sacrifice spread through the fleet, something unprecedented happened. Ships that had been fighting defensively suddenly went on the attack. Crews that had been calculating acceptable losses started ignoring losses entirely. The Altarian captain who had spent 3 hours trying to safely disable a swarm node suddenly rammed it head-on. A Verdani science vessel, armed with nothing but mining lasers, charged straight into a formation of enemy ships. Even the dignified crystalline commanders began ordering their crews to take risks that would have been unthinkable just days before. Admiral Chen watched it all from the bridge of her damaged flagship, tears streaming down her face. Around her, the battle raged with an intensity that defied description. Ships were dying faster than ever. But for every vessel lost, 2 more pressed the attack. The galaxy had learned humanity's greatest lesson. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. "Admiral," her tactical officer called out, "the swarm formation is showing signs of serious disruption. Their coordination is breaking down." Chen wiped her eyes and focused on the display. The massive central structure at the heart of the swarm was pulsing erratically, its movements becoming jerky and unpredictable. Around it, the smaller nodes were failing to maintain formation. "What's happening to them?" she asked. "Unknown, but if I had to guess, I'd say they're experiencing a system crash. Their intelligence was designed to counter rational behavior, but what we're doing now, it's beyond their ability to process." The Void Swarm had consumed galaxies by exploiting the self-preservation instincts of rational beings. It understood fear, greed, the desire to survive at any cost, but it had never encountered an enemy that fought with love. That was what this had become, Chen realized. Not just a battle for territory or resources, but a fight driven by something the swarm couldn't comprehend. Love for strangers they would never meet. Love for worlds they had never seen. Love for the simple idea that some things were worth dying for. "All ships," she broadcast. "This is Admiral Chen. The enemy is weakening. All vessels begin final assault. For Taurus. For all of them." The response was immediate and overwhelming. What remained of the combined fleet surged forward as one, every ship racing toward the massive central structure. There was no formation, no coordination, just thousands of vessels driven by a shared purpose. At the center of the formation, Kai Seth's bioship led the charge. The Crystal Warrior had been changed by Taurus's sacrifice. His understanding of warfare fundamentally altered. He no longer fought with the detached precision of an immortal being. He fought with the desperate intensity of someone who had something precious to protect. "All guard vessels," he commanded, "abandon defensive protocols. Full assault!" His fellow warriors stared at him in shock. For 3,000 years, the Eternal Guard had never abandoned their defensive protocols. They were the foundation of their fighting style, the careful balance that had kept them alive through millennia of warfare. "Eternal One," Velandra protested, "without defensive protocols, we risk total destruction." "Then we risk it," Kai Seth replied. "Some things are worth the risk." The bioships of the Eternal Guard joined the final charge, their crystal hulls blazing with unleashed power. Around them, vessels from dozens of species poured everything they had into one last desperate attack. The space around the swarm's central structure became a maze of energy beams, missile trails, and burning wreckage. The swarm fought back with everything it had, but its responses were becoming increasingly erratic. Its intelligence was caught in a feedback loop, trying to process the illogical behavior of enemies who seemed determined to destroy themselves in order to win. When the breakthrough came, it was sudden and complete. A combined assault by human, Altarian, and guard vessels punched through the swarm's defenses and reached the central core. The massive structure, which had seemed invincible just hours before, suddenly began to collapse as its control systems failed. The explosion that followed lit up the entire star system. The central core detonated like a dying star, its destruction sending shockwaves through the rest of the swarm formation. One by one, the subsidiary nodes began shutting down, their connection to the hive mind severed. In the silence that followed, Admiral Chen stared at her tactical display in amazement. The readings were clear. The Void Swarm was dead. After millennia of terror, the galaxy's greatest threat had finally been stopped. But the cost had been enormous. Of the thousands of ships that had joined the final assault, less than half remained. The combined casualties numbered in the millions, beings from dozens of species who had given their lives for a cause they believed in. "Admiral," her communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving surrender signals from the remaining swarm nodes. They're They're asking for mercy. Chen stared at the message in disbelief. The void swarm, which had never shown mercy to any living thing, was now begging for the same consideration it had never given. After a moment, she opened a channel to the surviving fleet. All ships, this is Admiral Chen. The enemy is requesting surrender. What are your orders? The response came not from the military commanders or the Eternal Guard, but from the civilian captains who had joined the fight. Ordinary beings who had learned something extraordinary about themselves. Show them the mercy they never showed us, came the voice of the Altarian freighter captain. But make sure they can never hurt anyone again. Similar responses came from across the fleet. The galaxy had learned to fight like humans, but it had also learned to win like humans, with strength tempered by mercy, with victory measured not just in enemies defeated but in innocence protected. 5 years later, Admiral Chen stood in the Hall of Memory on New Terra, humanity's first major colony world. The walls were covered with the names of every being who had died in the battle for Kepler Nexus, their sacrifice remembered in dozens of languages. But the memorial was not just about the dead. It was about what their deaths had accomplished. The galaxy was different now, fundamentally changed by the events of that terrible day. The Eternal Guard still protected the stars, but they no longer fought alone. The Unity Vanguard, as it was now called, included beings from every major species. They had learned that sometimes the greatest strength came not from crystal skin or advanced technology, but from the simple willingness to stand together when everything seemed lost. Human tactics had spread throughout galactic military doctrine. Academies that had once taught careful conservative warfare now included courses on what they called acceptable sacrifice. The phrase had entered the common tongue of a dozen species, always spoken with the same reverence that once reserved for the names of gods. Admiral, came a voice behind her. Chen turned to see Kaiseth approaching, his crystal form as imposing as ever but somehow more approachable than it had been years before. The ancient warrior had requested this meeting, though he had not said why. Kaiseth, she said with a smile. It's good to see you again. And you, Admiral. I wanted to speak with you about something that has been troubling me. Chen raised an eyebrow. Oh? For 3,000 years, my people were known as the Eternal Guard. We were legends, myths, beings beyond the understanding of mortal races. But now, he paused, looking at the memorial wall. Now children sing songs about Sergeant Torres. They build shrines to Captain Chen. They pray to humans. Chen felt uncomfortable with that idea. We never asked for that. I know. That is what makes it remarkable. You changed the galaxy not because you sought glory, but because you simply did what needed to be done. You taught us that legends are not born from power or immortality. They are born from choice. The choice to help others. The choice to stand up when it would be easier to sit down. The choice to fight when it would be safer to run. The choice to care about strangers. Kaiseth looked at her with something that might have been respect. You have shown us that mortality is not a weakness. It is a strength. Chen thought about Torres, about all the humans who had died in that battle and the battles that followed. They had changed the galaxy, but the cost had been enormous. Was it worth it? She looked at the memorial wall again, at the names of beings from dozens of worlds who had learned to fight and die for something greater than themselves. Yes, she decided. It was worth it. So what happens now? She asked. Now we continue to protect the galaxy, Kaiseth replied. But we do it together. The Unity Vanguard is more than just a military alliance. It is a promise that no world will face the darkness alone. As if to emphasize his point, an alarm began sounding throughout the memorial hall. Chen's communication device crackled to life with an urgent message. Unknown hostiles had been detected on the edge of known space. Another threat, another challenge to face. Chen smiled and activated her response beacon. Across the galaxy, thousands of ships would be receiving the same signal. Human vessels and Eternal Guard bioships, Altarian battlecruisers and Verdani science vessels, craft from dozens of species united by a common purpose. The call would go out not for the Eternal Guard as it had for millennia, but for the Unity Vanguard. Because the galaxy had learned something important in the battle for Kepler Nexus.